Okay, so section 2, rehabilitation. Regarding a rehab program that required lethal intervention or significant intervention, most of the programs I had submitted either required just 1 or 2 changes. That being said, usually the changes were not something that was wrong to do, but more of they were usually suggestions of something that could be done better, or techniques that are more specific or better for a particular injury. I think this was good for my learning, especially because with the things that weren't changed, it definitely helped build my confidence, as it meant that I was able to get most of it right, or if not all of it right. But just as I believe there's room for improvement, there was room for improvement given the changes that were recommended. I think the suggestions also helped keep me honest about what I was doing. It made me reflect on whether I think those interventions are actually effective or not. There were also some times where I made modifications to the treatment plans, not necessarily based off of the feedback I received on the rehab plans, but just based on the circumstances of the treatment session, like if the patient was late, or if I thought a particular technique wouldn't be as pertinent versus another one. I would sort of make the change on the spot. I would ask my supervisor if they thought this would be a better technique or not. And sometimes I would also ask if the technique I was doing, if it was effective, or if they have a better way to do it, especially if I wasn't feeling confident about it. The same thing occurred with the exercises. So while the exercises that I had proposed were still good, they would work sometimes. They would work on paper in theory, like before the session actually happened, but while the session was actually starting, we would see some changes, like perhaps the exercise looked too easy. So this just meant that we had to change things, and typically my supervisor asked me my supervisor told me whether or not they think I should progress it, and that helped me sort of pay attention to whether this exercise was actually looking effective or not. One of my patients, so second question regarding on programs focused on patients' goals. One of my patients' goals was to be able to return to being able to do a RDL without having pain. With this rehab, we started doing easier hip hinging exercises, and eventually we were able to get back to loading RDLs without the patient experiencing any pain. At first, I could tell that the patient was frustrated with the slow progressions and wanted to return to RDLs, and I noted this in activity 4. I tried to, regarding this frustration the patient was experiencing, I tried to progress them fast but also safely, noting when they were struggling with exercises and when they were too easy, and which meant we had to progress. I wanted to progress the patient quick, but I also wanted to be cautious as not to re-aggravate the injury, and first to fix the underlying cause, or biomechanical error, before starting doing RDLs again and just re-aggravating the injury and starting off from square one. Once we did start RDLs, for me it was important to first start unloaded to see the patient's form, and then see if there's anything with the patient's form itself that was actually leading to the injury before we start helping with their goal of loading up the RDL. Eventually we did load up the RDLs, and that was the patient's goal, but those first steps that we had to take is the patient doing them correctly? Do they have the proper muscular mechanics? And that type of thing. After we achieved that goal, the patient then started reporting intermittent pain in the SI, unrelated to the RDLs. So then our new goal was to address the SI pain so that, one, it doesn't get worse, and two, so that it doesn't affect the RDLs. Describing my patients' progressions, there were patients who progressed. So two of my patients, they progressed pretty well day to day with tangible differences, and then there was one patient who only had some progression with not much of any difference from the initial assessment. With the patients who progressed well, exercises had to be changed almost weekly to be more challenging, and symptoms typically declined. With the other patient, symptoms initially got better, but those gains became stagnant after the first few sessions. Each session, I remember checking the accessory movements of the patella, and then also doing mobilizations, and I could see that, and I can feel the adhesions that I tried to break down the previous session with mobilizations were back, meaning the changes that we made during the sessions were reversed after a week. With this patient, there was an underlying cause that I was not able to address with the program initially. The patient was visibly overweight, and I believed that this was one of the determining factors of this patient's injury. I reflected on this in activity 7, where I explained the different factors that could be contributing to this injury, including the patient's weight. Regarding this, I think I could have, if I acknowledged this sooner, I think I only acknowledged this towards the end of my time with this patient, sort of when it was too late. I informed them that that's what I think is one of the causes, and I think it was too late at that point. But going back, I think I could have, after talking with the patient about this, I think I could have implemented a more intensive home exercise program with the goal of burning more calories. The feedback I received on this same activity was whether I would change any sets and reps. I think for this patient, I think I would have a bigger focus on stretching and having longer reps, because it seemed that all of our gains were going away after a week. I think that incorporating longer stretching routines to address the soft tissue shortening that was causing the dysfunction, I think that might have helped. So initially I prescribed only 1 minute, but I think I prescribed 1 minute because I thought the patient would get bored after a minute, or I thought one minute is a realistic time to give to a patient before they start getting either bored or they get distracted. I think after explaining to the patient why I think it's important for them to stretch longer, I think I would ask them to stretch maybe 3 minutes each exercise with two sets. Obviously explaining to them why I think it's important and why I think it's going to help them get better, since all of our gains from each session were usually canceled out the next session. So to measure progression, I used pain. So as the patient reported less pain, I considered this progression. And then I also used functionality. And the pain sort of contributed to the functionality of the patient. As patients experience less pain with certain activities of daily living, they were more likely to do that thing. All of my patients were restricted in doing something that they were hoping to get back to. So functionality was a good measure that I could use for all of my patients. Like one patient wanted to do an RDL, or one patient was having troubles with RDL, so I measured the progress with how they could do an RDL and if there was any pain with it. Another patient reported that bending over to tie their shoes was very painful, and towards the end they said they were able to tie their shoes no problem. So that was another functional progress that we were able to make. And then another patient reported stairs as a functional limitation that they had. Initially they had problems walking up the stairs and down the stairs, and then as time progressed they only had problems walking down the stairs. So I thought that was a good success and a good way to measure progress. In activity 4, I mentioned implementing a patient-specific functionality skill, rating their confidence to do an activity without pain from 0 to 10. So 0 is being 100% confident they can do this activity without any pain, and 10 being I have 0 confidence that I can do this functional activity without any pain. This was also helpful because this was a patient-reported outcome measure, and I was able to track on a scale of 0 to 10 our progress based on their functionality. And then another way I was able to measure progress was just through resisted range of motion. My style of treatment. So I tried to make my treatment programs around 50% manual treatment and then 50% exercise. And this is partially because the patient has paid money for treatment. So only prescribing exercise is something they can do at home anyways, and not something they would have wanted to have paid a certain amount of money for. I think manual is important because this is something a patient cannot do at home, and it's an efficient use of your time with you and your patient. I also think in early rehab manual work is more important because patients can't do exercise. If I could adjust something to make my style of treatment better, would be implementing more treatment techniques based off of the observations that I have observed. So like stretches or exercise based on the observations. And this was the feedback I gained at activity 5 or activity 3, sorry. And going forward, I want to continue to look at the observations to address injuries. Especially because this is gonna help, like if I have an underlying cause that I haven't addressed or recurrent chronic pain, this is going to be important for this is going to be important for the rehab program. A 50-50 rehab split of manual to exercise is something professors and mentors in the past have mentioned. In more of a clinical setting with paying customers, some of the mentors I've had have favored much more manual treatment, as this is sort of a better use of their time together. If patients know how to do a certain exercise, they can always perform it at home, but obviously manual is not something they can do at home, and is typically what they pay money for. My mentors have also made a good point to develop a good relationship with their clients, so keeping the mood friendly and humorous. I believe the helped I believe this helped develop their patient rapport and trust in order to bring them back. Something I mentioned I wanted to get better at in activity 1, reflecting. Building rapport and trust is something I mentioned back in activity 1, and reflecting on my experience in ACP, I found that my patients came back each week, with the exception of one patient for 1 week. At first, I think I was much more conscious about assessment and rehab, to the point that I was not able to multitask, as in assess or treat, while I was trying to develop that relationship with them. So I was more like robotic, just assessing or treating. But I think as I got more proficient at assessment and treating, I was more confident and I was less fearful, and I was able to help build that relationship while I was assessing and treating versus being robotic. Going forward, I think I want to expand on my inventory of exercises. I think I found that a lot of the exercises I prescribe are typically ones that I like to do myself. I want to try to expand and move away from this, by learning more specific and useful exercises and moving away from my biases. So this could be through just exploring resources like using the internet, going through textbooks, or any sort of educational content to learn more exercises or more unique exercises.